You can continue to watch this Democratic rally online at cspan.org. The U.S. House is gaveling in momentarily. Their first legislative session in the second session of the 113th Congress. They will consider 3 bills this afternoon, including one eliminating auto dealer emissions certification on light trucks. We expect debate on those 3 bills. They'll gavel out, and we expect votes on any recorded votes requested mid-afternoon today. Live coverage now of the House here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We pause now in your presence and acknowledge our dependence on you. We ask your blessing upon the men and women of this, the People's House, who have returned to their stations here on Capitol Hill. As the new session begins, help them, and indeed help us all, to obey your law, to do your will, and to walk in your way. Grant that they might be good in thought, gracious in word, generous in deed, and great in spirit. Many other fellow citizens continue to struggle through a difficult economic stretch and look to them for helpful leadership. Grant them the resolve to fashion solutions that might benefit those who are in need. Make this a glorious day in which all are glad to be alive and ready to serve you. And may all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Hahn.
Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are congressional and administration attempts to circumvent and undermine decades-old laws that prohibit the United States from funding any agency at the United Nations that admits a non-existent Palestinian state. In October 2011, UNESCO chose to welcome Palestine to its membership. It did so knowing full well that this would trigger U.S. laws that prohibit us from funding any entity at the UN that grants membership to the PLO or any other organization that doesn't meet the internationally recognized attributes of statehood. We must not grant a waiver to UNESCO nor approve any other backdoor congressional attempt to provide U.S. funding to UNESCO until it reverses its decision regarding the Palestinian Authority. We are in an economic tailspin, Mr. Speaker, so why waste $250 million in U.S. taxpayer money by giving it, wasting it, to UNESCO? It's madness. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of over 1 million Americans who saw their unemployment benefits disappear on December the 28th. With our economy still struggling and unemployment remaining unacceptably high, now is not the time to take more money out of the pockets of those who are struggling to simply get by. This week, Republicans would rather continue debating the Affordable Care Act instead of working to get our economy back on track by helping to raise the standard of living for the poorest Americans and provide assistance to the unemployed. Democrats in the House and the Senate are working to offer solutions here in Washington and back in our districts. In the district I represent, I'm helping constituents find jobs by hosting a job fair on January the 24th. The constituents I serve will have the opportunity to apply for jobs on site, network with employers, and attend professional development workshops. Mr. Speaker, we need to address the job crisis in America, and Republicans need to get back to the business of fixing our economy. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, I received the following letter from a constituent. Dear Congresswoman Fox, on December 10, I applied for a silver lever plan and received confirmation the same day that my application was completed. Since then, I've waited for my invoice so I could pay for the insurance. I called on December 23rd and waited close to 5 hours on the phone for the next available rep, only to be put on hold for another 1.5 hours and finally be told they had no idea when my invoice would be sent. As of January 2, 2013, I have not been billed for my new insurance. I have 6 prescriptions that need to be filled at the end of the month. When will the program be fixed and operational? Mr. Speaker, it's a good question, and the American people deserve an answer. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 11 days now since 1.3 million Americans have been cut off from their unemployment benefits, an important safety net, and this House has yet to address this crisis. Instead of offering a solution to extend emergency unemployment benefits, House Republicans keep moving the goalposts and changing their positions. What on earth are we waiting for? Every week that goes by, more and more Rhode Islanders lose their emergency unemployment benefits. The longer we wait to fix this problem, the more serious it becomes for the long-term unemployed. 50 years ago today, President Johnson announced his war on poverty. And to commemorate that anniversary, this Congress is willing to write off and forget about 1.3 million Americans who are struggling to find work. What kind of public servants have we become when we take away the last safety net for struggling families 3 days before Christmas? This is shameful. Mr. Speaker, I urge you to bring a bill to the floor to extend emergency unemployment benefits. 1.3 million Americans can't wait another day, another week, or another month for this Congress to act. Let's do the right thing and end this nightmare for those we serve. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new year brings new perspective, and for many, a fresh start. Many of my hardworking constituents hope this year will bring a healthy economy with increased opportunities. My House colleagues and I didn't need a new year to make this our goal. Last year we passed dozens of bills making job creation and expanding opportunity our central focus. This included bills to make energy more affordable, repeal Obamacare, and expand education for students and job seekers. If the Senate would only act on these measures, we could offer more opportunities for our constituents today. Bills like the Energy Consumers Relief Act, halting major new regulations that increase prices and hurt the economy. The Northern Routes Approval Act to finally approve the Keystone Pipeline and immediately create thousands of good-paying jobs. Or the Skills Act to eliminate and streamline dozens of overlapping federal programs and help connect job seekers with the skills they need. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to continued work with my colleagues, supporting additional measures to strengthen our economy, provide more opportunity for all, and put Americans back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On December the 28th, House Republicans, Happy New Year. You look great. But we failed to address the issues of the people who are unemployed. And I call upon all of us today to remember that many people, as we sit here, are facing fiscal devastation. The social safety net is used to purchase very basic necessities such as food and rent. And many of Americans are treading now on just staying above the water. 1.3 million Americans are without unemployment insurance as of December 28th, but in another few weeks, 1.9 will join them. 174,000 of these are from Texas. I know that we have not really thought about this seriously. I know that so much time was spent attempting to overturn the Affordable Care Act that we forgot that there are people that we have failed to provide jobs for that are now unemployed, that we cannot forget. This is not just their problem. This is our problem. Please join me in making sure that we restore this safety net. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I stand regarding the qualified mortgage rule that will go into effect this Friday. Mr. Speaker, this rule is going to have a devastating effect on the housing industry. Once again, the long hand of the federal government goes out to dictate policy to the financial industry on who they should make loans to. Once again, we face another crisis in the housing industry. The federal government, frankly, was one of the major culprits in the housing demise that we've just gone through, making easy credit for borrowers. Now they're telling financial institutions clearly the wrong direction to go. We need the markets to work. The federal government has proven also as well they sure can't handle health care through Obamacare. Why do we think the government knows best when it comes to telling community banks and others who they should make their loans to? 50% of the loans made in 2013 will not be made for 2014 with these guidelines. Mr. Speaker, we call for this rule to be delayed for a year to allow Congress to improve it. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House of Representatives.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, last month, many of us stood here and pleaded with Speaker Boehner to act to extend unemployment insurance for 1.3 million hurting Americans, including over 213,000 in California alone. Everyday Americans like Vincent, people who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own, will be devastated if we do not right this wrong. Vincent's 57 and worked at Bank of America in my home state of California. He says that he's interviewed with other organizations since being laid off but has not found a job. He's not given up, but Vincent worries that he may have to start sleeping in his car, going to food pantries, since losing his unemployment benefits on December 28th. Mr. Speaker, we have the ability to help these people. Congress has extended unemployment insurance time and time again with wide bipartisan support because it was the right thing to do as human beings and as legislatures. We must do that again. Earlier, many of us stood with President Johnson's daughter, Lyndon Johnson Robb, as we marked the 50th anniversary of President Johnson's declaration of an unconditional war on poverty. And in this ongoing war on poverty, extending unemployment benefits to Americans who've lost their jobs is one of our greatest weapons.
Gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition? Gentleman from Utah is recognized.
To my fellow members and my fellow Americans, I wish you all a successful and blessed new year. But before we begin the political battles of the year, I'd like to take a moment to congratulate the newly elected officials in the Utah's 2nd Congressional District, specifically John Pike, the new mayor of St. George in Washington County. I look forward to working with Mayor Pike to continue to grow the economy and to create new jobs. But I want to take a moment to specifically thank Mayor Dan MacArthur, who tirelessly served the people of St. George for more than 20 years. Under his tenure, the population nearly tripled in size. They had expansion and creation of many new businesses, great new infrastructure, a beautiful new airport, and the transformation of Dixie State College into a 4-year university. Mayor Dan is a true representative of the Dixie spirit. His volunteerism was shown in 2005 when they had severe flooding along the Virgin River. He and other city council members joined other citizens in sandbagging the river to prevent severe damage and more flooding. I'm pleased to call Mayor Dan a friend, and I'm grateful for his fine example and his many years of service. I wish he and his family the very best in their future endeavors. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 50 years ago, during President Lyndon Baines Johnson's State of the Union address, he declared a war on poverty to create an opportunity for families and Americans to have stability in economic development, health care, and education. And 50 years later, I stand on this House floor with his daughter, Linda Johnson Robb. 46 million families living in poverty, 16.5 million of them children. I say today, let's end this war on poverty. Let's support the $40 billion for SNAP. Let's make a difference in the lives of Americans. We deserve to provide them the opportunity to have that opportunity that President Lyndon Baines Johnson talked about. Thank you to his daughter for reminding us of his legacy. Thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus and Congresswoman Barbara Lee for leading our charge in making a difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I asked all Democrats and Republicans to join me today to pledge that we will take care of those children and families living in poverty as we move forward. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition? The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of talk today about the importance of unemployment benefits. And the truth is, too many Americans are out of work. But my constituents don't just need jobs, they need good-paying jobs. The President touts job gains in our economy. Unfortunately, many of the jobs gained over the past several years aren't the kind needed to get Hoosiers back on their feet. They're the kind that require long hours of work for little pay, with few or no benefits. They're the kind whose paychecks don't go as far as they used to because necessities like gas, food, education, and health care cost more and more. They're the kind where people work harder but fall farther behind. That's not the America I grew up in. My America, our America, is one where those who work hard and play by the rules can afford the basic necessities of life, and then have a little left over for wants, not just needs. It's time for Congress to spend more time working for these hard-working Americans and less worrying about those who either don't need government or already have a government that works for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today is the 50th anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson's historic war on poverty. But lately, it seems more like a war on the poor. Earlier today, at a meeting organized by Congresswoman Lee, his daughter, Linda Johnson Robb, said that she accompanied her father on his historic tour of Appalachia. And she said, and I quote, when Daddy came to this town and was sworn in as president, the poverty level of our country was at 20%. When Daddy left this town, it was at 12% of the population. He made a big difference working with this body in a bipartisan way, and we can do it again. Mr. Speaker, let's pass a jobs plan, raise the minimum wage, restore nutrition assistance and affordable housing assistance, and extend unemployment benefits to help those families get by while they're looking for work. And as Lyndon Johnson did 5 decades ago, let us again declare an all-out war on human poverty and unemployment in these United States. Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
consent to address the House for 1 minute, advising extend.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the House will consider a bill offered by Representative Pitts that would require the Obama administration to notify Americans who had their personal information stolen after signing up for health insurance through Obamacare. As someone who has made protecting Social Security numbers a priority, I'm deeply concerned about an increase of identity theft through the flawed Obamacare website. You see, Social Security numbers are the key to identity theft. Yet CMS, which is the same agency that runs health care, has failed to protect seniors' identity by refusing to remove Social Security numbers from Medicare cards. That's why Mr. Pitt's bill, along with H.R. 781, the Medicare Identity Theft Prevention Act, which I introduced with my Democrat colleague Lloyd Doggett, are two simple yet effective ways we can protect Americans and keep their private information just that, private. I urge my colleagues to join our efforts. We must do what's right for Americans. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as Congress begins a new session, House Republican leadership must not ignore last year's urgent, unfinished business. Right after Christmas, 1.3 million Americans had their unemployment benefits terminated. Republicans refused to extend unemployment insurance has created a state of emergency for struggling families across this nation, including thousands in Minnesota. Earned unemployment benefits are a lifeline for Americans seeking work. Extending this critical safety net will help our neighbors meet basic needs, paying rent, buying food, and providing warmth in this very frigid winter. Long-term unemployment is record high. There are 3 job seekers for every job available. It is wrong for this Republican majority to turn their backs on unemployed Americans. 50 years ago, President Lyndon Johnson launched a war on poverty. Today, this fight means extending emergency unemployment insurance and preventing more Americans and their children to fall into poverty. With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, in 2013, we witnessed the disastrous impacts of big government. From the administration's failed rollout of Obamacare, destroying jobs, to the undermining of our national security by military sequestration, we know this harms our families, our economy, and our safety. Last week, I had the opportunity to travel across South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District to unveil legislative priorities for 2014. My constituents shared my concerns that Congress must focus on legislation to create jobs through economic growth. We must also reduce our spending so that our children and grandchildren will not be faced with burden of out-of-control debt. Encouraging energy independence through the completion of the Keystone XL pipeline will also create jobs at Michelin and MTU in South Carolina. Additionally, promoting our brave men and women in uniform, military families and veterans must remain at the top of our priority list. We must protect our heroes who risk their lives to protect us. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. As co-chair of the Congressional Black Caucus's Task Force on Poverty and Economy and chair of the Democratic Whip's Task Force on Poverty, Income Inequality, and Opportunity, I join my colleagues today in making and marking President Lyndon Baines Johnson's 1964 State of the Union Address. 50 years ago, President Johnson boldly declared an unconditional war on poverty. Now, for the next 50 days, members will be giving on this floor 50 speeches and continuing this war for economic justice. And I am so pleased and honored that President Johnson's and Lady Bird Johnson's eldest daughter, Mrs. Linda Johnson Robb, accepted our invitation to join us here today. She's here in the gallery, and I just want to say to her that she exemplifies President and Mrs. Johnson's commitment and the leadership required to fight poverty and build a great society. She visited Appalachia, as she told us earlier, with her daddy, and reminded us today that this was a bipartisan and bicameral effort requiring leadership from the White House. Now, President Johnson's war on poverty created critical anti-poverty programs such as Head Start, Job Corps, food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. As President Johnson said 50 years ago, it will not be short or easy the struggle.
Gentle-lady's time has expired.
Thank you again.
What purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for a minute.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was the 125th anniversary of one of the premier academic institutions in Utah, Weber State University. Originally a religious school, Weber State Academy, with 200 students, this is today a full university with over 25,000 students, and a great addition to its home city of Ogden, as well as its satellite campus in Davis County. I am very pleased of my association with Weber State University. My father-in-law played football. My wife and daughter are graduates. Even one of our colleagues, Representative Jenkins of Kansas, is a graduate of Weber State. My son worked for the administration for a while there as well. Its first president was a Renaissance immigrant from Germany who composed my favorite hymn. Its second principal, David O. McKay, became a leader of my church. Its most recent president, Dr. Milner, was the first female leader of a university in the state of Utah. And under its current leadership with President White, I expect another 125 years of great research, innovation, and education taking place in Weber State. Everyone in Utah wore purple yesterday in honor of this event. As cold as it was here, I'm also proud to say I was wearing a Weber State hoodie and sweats all night long, obviously in honor of Weber State and to try and stay warm back here in Washington. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Members are reminded not to address attendees in the gallery. What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
To address the House, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I'd like to thank the leadership that we've had leading this country. In the instance of President Lyndon Baines Johnson, represented by his wonderful family, his wife, his late wife, Lucy Baines Johnson, and our dear friend here in Washington, the former First Lady of Virginia, Linda Johnson Robb. They understand the words that our President gave us. Unfortunately, many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, and some on the outskirts of health. I join my colleague, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, to say to you that the war on poverty is not over. For as we look at the red on this, every single state has someone living in poverty. And those individuals are represented in 16 million children. 20,000 military veterans are also included in those who are not getting unemployment benefits. 1.3 million Americans. And so as we look at those who need Head Start, a program that was a generational result of the President Johnson's effort, we must fight to extend unemployment insurance, and we must ensure that the war on poverty remains our cause and our hope. It is important to give hope to Americans. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Montana seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute, provide some remarks.
The gentleman from Montana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, during a recent Homeland Security Oversight Committee hearing, we learned just how deeply flawed the Obamacare website was upon its launch. The problems with this website went well beyond error messages and Americans being unable to successfully purchase insurance. We've learned that security risks to the Obamacare website were limitless long before the website's official launch. Worse, the Obama administration knew of these risks before the October 1st planned launch, and rather than fixing the problem, they consciously allowed Americans to put their personal information at risk by using this deeply flawed website. As someone who has worked in the technology sector, I know that if a private company launched a website with these kind of issues, the company might have gone under. At least people would have been fired. The administration's failure to secure this website in advance of its launch is wholly unacceptable, and that's why I'm proud to support the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act, which requires HHS to notify Americans if their personal information has been stolen or unlawfully accessed through an Obamacare exchange. The American people deserve to know if the Obamacare website jeopardized their privacy. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in support of this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Body for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to join my colleagues in marking the 50th anniversary of President Johnson's declaration of a war on poverty. This war was being won for 16 years, but since President Reagan's election 34 years ago, the free marketeers and their Republican Party proponents have pressed a war on the war on poverty. The results are heart-wrenching. The rich are getting richer while millions of middle-income families have been thrown into poverty. In my state of Georgia alone, almost 17% of households are food insecure, according to the Half in 10 Education Fund. 18% of people in Georgia earn less than $23,492 for a family of 4. Republicans blame the poor for being poor. And even worse, Mr. Speaker, they blame the 27.2% of children, Mr. Speaker, who are living below the poverty line in Georgia. Republicans who ignored the desperate pleas to extend SNAP and unemployment insurance programs are hurting the people I represent in Georgia and millions more throughout this great nation. It's a shame, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On December the 23rd, in my hometown of Tupelo, Mississippi, 2 of our police officers, Sergeant Gail Stauffer and Patrol Officer Joseph Mayer, were shot while attempting to apprehend a bank robber. Thankfully, Officer Mayer survived very serious wounds, and he's currently recovering. Tragically, Sergeant Stauffer died of those wounds. Gail, as he was known to his friends and family, spent his entire adult life in service to his country. He joined the U.S. military and bravely served his tour of duty in Iraq as sergeant in the Louisiana Army National Guard. After returning home, he settled with his family in Tupelo, where he's known for his Cajun cooking, his love of the outdoors, and his passionate support for LSU Tiger football. Above all, those who knew Sergeant Stauffer knew him as a man completely devoted to his wife and 2 children. I will be submitting letters of support for both of these brave men's nomination for the Congressional Badge of Bravery. Ronald Reagan once said, "Those who say that we're in a time where there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look." By their actions, Sergeant Stauffer and Officer Mayer have showed there are still heroes among us.
The gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to call on Speaker Boehner to allow the House to vote to extend emergency unemployment compensation, a program that is critical to thousands of my constituents in Ventura County struggling to find work. We also need to extend unemployment insurance for the more than 20,000 veterans who were cut off while they make their transition to the civilian workforce. And we need to extend unemployment insurance for the nearly 2 million children whose families need it for food, clothing, and shelter. Mr. Speaker, it's also an economic imperative, extending unemployment insurance to nearly 214,000 unemployed Californians who will use it to buy groceries, put gas in their cars, or keep the lights on would save over 46,000 jobs in my state. Mr. Speaker, it is both a moral and economic imperative that we extend unemployment insurance and that we do so without delay. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as Americans are making their New Year's resolutions, I think it's time that Congress makes a few New Year's resolutions of its own. Congress will resolve itself to stop asking for money and higher taxes from the American people to pay for more bureaucracy and more bloated federal programs. Congress will actually try to balance its budget, something the rest of the American people have to do. Congress will resolve itself to stop the onslaught of rules, regulations, and mandates on our constituents that slow down the economy and kill jobs. Congress will focus more on programs that create jobs and less on programs that create government dependency. Congress will stop allowing the federal government to spy and read the emails on innocent Americans. And Congress will resolve itself to live under the same laws it passes for everyone else with no special health care or retirement benefits. And lastly, Congress will resolve itself to spend more time listening to the American people and working together, Republicans and Democrats, to solve the problems our nation faces. Mr. Speaker, these are a few New Year's resolutions for Congress that we'd be well served to follow. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To adjust the floor and to extend and revise my comments.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there were a Hippocratic oath of legislating, it would prescribe that we, above all else, should do no harm. But we have a habit of violating that foundational precept. We've allowed unemployment insurance to 1.3 million Americans to expire, and that will not help our economy and will cost 200,000 jobs. In 1 month, we faced a recurring hostage-taking ritual that has become raising the debt limit. These debt limit showdowns have a real cost to our economy. The Government Accountability Office found that delayed action in 2011 resulted in $1.3 billion in higher borrowing costs. We can avoid that cost by enacting permanent reforms to the process like the ones employed in the recent debt limit adjustments. I introduced last year H.R. 233, which would permanently shift the role of Congress to disapproving debt ceiling increases instead of approving them, and allows the debt limit to be raised unless a supermajority of Congress votes to block the increase. I encourage my colleagues to join me in pursuing these permanent necessary reforms, avoid the replay of the hostage-taking and brinksmanship of last year, and take the steps to avoid doing any more unnecessary harm to American families.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revising extend my remarks.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the 50th anniversary of America's war on poverty. And while this war may have been launched with the best of intentions, it is clear we're engaged in a battle of attrition that has left more Americans in poverty than at any point in America's history by number. The fact is staggering, considering the $15 trillion and counting that has been spent on fighting this war on poverty. The status quo simply isn't working. In fact, it's hurting many, many vulnerable families. We have a moral obligation to do better for the people of Florida's 2nd Congressional District and across this great nation, and the 46.5 million Americans overall who are living in poverty. As chairman of the Republican Study Committee's Anti-Poverty Initiative, I look forward to working on things going forward, new forward-thinking solutions that do several things. Strengthens two-parent families, improve effective educational opportunities, create long-lasting job growth, producing fulfilling careers, and restoring people's God-given opportunity for earned success. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, 50 years ago today, President Johnson launched the War on Poverty, giving rise to some of the most successful anti-poverty programs in our history, including Medicare, Medicaid, food assistance, and Head Start. 5 decades later, eradicating poverty remains a moral imperative. It encompasses health and well-being, education, employment, and access to opportunity. We have made progress. In 1967, nearly 26% of Americans lived in poverty. Today, that number is 16%. Programs such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, which gives working Americans a ladder into the middle class, have helped us make that progress. But today in Congress, our commitment to ending poverty is in question. Because of Republican opposition, more than 18,000 Kentuckians and 1.3 million Americans are without a critical safety net as they continue to search for work. As a result, our economy lost $400 million last week alone. Unemployment insurance is one of the most effective ways to transition those who lost jobs back into the workforce. In 2012, it helped 2.5 million Americans work their way out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues today to recommit themselves to eradicating poverty and support an immediate extension of unemployment insurance. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Ask permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I rise to give voice to the many out-of-work Americans whose unemployment insurance was allowed to expire. James from Santa Maria, California wrote the following. I started working at the age of 16 because our father had died. I had, up until April 2012, gone to work every day. I'm no slouch. I'm a citizen, a taxpayer, a U.S. Army veteran. But now his unemployment insurance benefit is gone. For James and for millions of Americans like him, we must act. Unfortunately, House leadership has ignored this plight, and in doing so, these hardworking Americans will lose the means to keep job searching. We must extend this lifeline for the long-term unemployed, their children, for our local economies, which gain $3 of economic benefits for every $2 invested in the program. The Senate is on the verge of doing just that. With bipartisan support, we must follow their lead. James signed his letter to me in bold capital letters. Please help. I urge House leadership and my colleagues to do just that. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. What purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, last year, as many have said, ended on a somber note. Over 1 million of our fellow Americans lost a vital economic lifeline, the temporary insurance that helps them get by while searching for a new job. Louise, a constituent of mine from San Diego, recently wrote me to explain what losing such benefits means to her. She is 60 years old, and she has been looking for work since she was laid off a year ago from a stable job that she held just for about 15 years. And as she mentioned, it is very scary. I think that effectively on January 1st, I won't have any income. So what am I to do? I will have a roof over my head for a short time, but I won't have the funds to pay for utilities. And she went on to say, by cutting extended unemployment, all that will be accomplished is more people being on welfare or living on the streets homeless. And that helps us? How? Her story reminds us of our duty to lend a hand to those in need. Any of us could be in her shoes. Extending unemployment benefits is not only the right thing, but it's also good for our economy.
Mrs. Davis.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which a vote occurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken later. What purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 724, a bill to amend the Clean Air Act to remove the requirement for dealer certification of new light-duty motor vehicles.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 238, H.R. 724, a bill to amend the Clean Air Act to remove the requirement for dealer certification of new light-duty motor vehicles.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials in the record of the bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be the lead sponsor of H.R. 724, along with my colleague, Congressman Gary Peters of Michigan. This bipartisan bill, which has 106 co-sponsors, repeals an obsolete regulatory requirement that no longer makes sense. This legislation is fully supported by the auto industry, and I have a letter that I'd like to submit for the record from the 5 leading automotive trade associations, including the National Association of Automobile Dealer Association, highlighting their support. Since 1981, automobile dealers who deliver a new vehicle for sale have been required to provide a certificate to the purchaser indicating the vehicle conforms to the Clean Air Act emissions requirements. However, modern technology and standard vehicle warranties have rendered this paperwork requirement unnecessary and redundant for a number of reasons. First, every new vehicle must comply with the Clean Air Act requirements before it can enter the stream of commerce. Second, information certifying a vehicle is Clean Air Act compliant can already be found in a number of other locations, including under the hood of a vehicle, in a vehicle's manual, or on the EPA's website. And finally, many new sales warranties range from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of miles or a number of years, which far exceed the protections provided for in the regulatory requirement. During recent years, we have seen an unprecedented amount of federal regulation proposed and enacted. This bureaucratic creep not only threatens the scope of the entrepreneurial freedom, but also comes at a heavy cost, which by some estimation is approximately $1.7 trillion annually. In my district, when I'm out visiting with small business community and hardworking American taxpayers, the #1 concern I hear about is the burdensome regulations and the need to pare back federal government interference. H.R. 724 is a simple, direct, and sends a clear message that small business owners, and specifically auto dealers, should not be burdened with redundant regulatory requirements. This legislation will make the car buying process a little simpler and let auto dealers spend less time complying with obsolete regulatory requirements and more time developing their businesses, investing in local communities, and creating jobs. I look forward to continuing to find ways that reduce unnecessary red tape on the small business community. As H.R. 724 represents, this is not only a policy goal both sides of the aisle can agree on, but is a policy goal that can actually get done. I urge support from my colleagues, and Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio reserved. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Thank you. I rise today in support of H.R. 724, and I'd like to start off by thanking Mr. Latta from Ohio for his leadership on this issue and for his willingness to work with me in writing this bill. This legislation is simple and straightforward. It cuts red tape for small businesses and allows auto dealers to focus on selling cars and creating jobs, not unnecessary paperwork. This bill also benefits consumers. It is one less piece of paper when buying a car, so consumers can focus on what is really important to them, and that is their purchase. When I came to Congress in 2009, it was a very dark period for our entire economy, but particularly for the auto industry. I will never forget the meeting I had during that time with Chrysler's CEO and his management team, and they told me that they were not only weeks away from bankruptcy, but that without access to government loans, they would not have the resources to reorganize and would have been forced to liquidate the company. A liquidation of any of the major auto manufacturers would have wreaked havoc on the supply chain and dragged the entire industry down with it, eliminating millions of good-paying U.S. jobs. My state of Michigan has helped build our nation's middle class. Our history is proof that you cannot have a strong middle class without a strong manufacturing sector, and you cannot have a strong manufacturing sector without a thriving auto industry. That is why I was proud to fight for Michigan workers and middle-class families and our auto industry to secure the loans that they needed to weather this economic storm. Fast forward to today. Our auto industry is now driving our economic recovery and paving the way to rebuilding our middle class. Vehicle sales are at the highest point they've been since May of 2007, and vehicle manufacturers and suppliers are ramping up production, hiring more workers, and investing in innovation. That is why it is critical that Congress continue to support our auto industry and our middle class. I'm glad to work with Congressman Latta on a common-sense solution to eliminate outdated and unnecessary burdens on small businesses. Auto dealers should not have to provide additional paperwork confirming that a vehicle complies with the Clean Air Act, since every new vehicle entering the market already meets that standard. Compliance with the Clean Air Act is certainly very important, but redundant paperwork just slows down our small businesses and our consumers. Auto dealers are upstanding community citizens. They sponsor Little League teams, scholarships, and volunteer their time to help others. Dealers provide significant value and expertise when consumers want to purchase a new car or truck and to work to make financing a vehicle affordable. Today's new vehicle features innovations ranging from safety technology that makes our roads safer for all of us to infotainment packages that provide convenience and an enhanced riding experience. Features that a knowledgeable dealer can play a very important role in educating the car-buying public about. So I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 724 and end this outdated burden on a small business and small businesses that can be found in every community in our country. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Michigan reserves. Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. And gentlemen, Mr. Peters, thank you also. I'm actually a new car dealer and have been a new car dealer for many, many years, since 1970. At a store my dad started in 1953 after coming back from the war. So I got to tell you, it used to be so easy to deliver a car to a customer, and the excitement about getting that new car was just one of the biggest things a family could do. They come in the show and they were so excited about taking delivery of a new car, being able to drive off that lot, drive around America, do whatever they wanted to do. And Mr. Peters referred to dealers in the community. I can tell you, if you really want to know the significance of new car dealers, go to any town, anywhere in this country, and look at the outfield fence where Little Leagues play. Open up any program to any high school performance and see who the sponsors are. Look at any of the fundraising opportunities that take place in each community. You'll find out it is the automobile dealers who are there first and foremost and always there. That's just what we do. In addition to providing good transportation, we support our community. We hire people. We allow people to work in our community. They do great things in our community. Now, when we talk about H.R. 724, the question comes then, why do we continue to layer time after time, paper after paper, on somebody just trying to take delivery of a new car? In a survey, a recent survey, the number one thing that consumers don't like about buying a car is the paperwork. It is endless. Now, when I first started in 1969 selling cars, all you had to do was sign the retail order form and sign the temporary registration, set it in. Well, now we have volumes of papers that must be signed. They don't only have to sign that they agree to something, they have to sign that they agree not to do something, and that was offered to somebody else and to them also. So this full declaration has gotten crazy. Now, when it comes to the Clean Air Act, I can take anybody out in the lot. In fact, we can go out in the streets right now, open your hood of your car. There's a sticker underneath that says exactly what that vehicle performs like and how does it meet the requirements of the Clean Air Act. It's there on the manufacturer's statement of origin. When customers take delivery of a car, they sign that certificate. That's a certificate saying that it applies to the Clean Air
I
Act.
yield the gentleman an additional minute.
So,
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
and I thank you. Listen, this just makes so much sense. At a time when America looks at this institution and says, why don't you just work together to get rid of some of this overregulation, this overburdensome, this cost adding to almost everything that we do? We can do it. And I appreciate what Mr. Latta has done and what Mr. Peters has done. There's over 105 of us that sit right here in this room that agree it needs to be done right now. So let's not hold up on it. Let's do what's right for the American people. Let's make sure that we simplify it and make it easier for people to go ahead and take delivery of their new car, takes away cost, adds then that money that we don't spend on that can go back into the communities, can go back into building our businesses, go back into rebuilding America. I thank you and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank Mr. Kelly for his comments and certainly for his support of what I think is a very practical, common-sense bill that deals with an issue that we need to address. And I think it's very encouraging to see us come together in a bipartisan way to deal with this issue in a very common-sense approach. With that, I have no further speakers, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan yields back. Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, it appears that we have no further speakers on our side, and I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 724? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Yeas.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested on H.R. 724. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3527, the Poison Center Network Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3527, a bill to amend the Public Health Service Act to reauthorize the Poison Center National Toll-Free Number, National Media Campaign and Grant Program, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials in the record on the bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 3527, the Poison Center Network Act, introduced by Representative Lee Terry, reauthorizes important activities related to poison control centers. Specifically, the bill reauthorizes the National Poison Center toll-free number, the Poison Center's national media campaign, and the state grant program, which funds 56 poison control centers around the United States. The Department of Health and Human Services estimates that in any given year, there will be between 3 to 5 million poison exposures. 60% of these exposures will involve children under the age of 6 who are exposed to toxins in their home. Poisoning is the second most common form of unintentional death in the United States. and accounts for 285,000 hospitalizations a year. According to a report from the Institute of Medicine, every dollar spent on Poison Control Center services saves $7 in medical spending. I would urge all my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 3527, the Poison Center Network Act, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I would like unanimous consent to put into the record the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone's floor statement on this bill.
The gentleman's statement will be covered by general leave. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This important legislation, which passed the Energy and Commerce Committee by unanimous consent in December, reauthorizes the national toll-free phone number, media campaign, and grant program, which have